Oh. The broom has gotten stuck and is blocking the door. Please, can you get it for me? It's because of your bad behavior that things like this happen. It's your punishment for stealing our son from us. Reflect on your actions for a while. After saying this, the mother-in-law burst into laughter. I was shocked by her words. I was forced to clean a long and used sauna. And then I was locked inside it by my mother-in-law while the sauna was running. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law, ignoring my pleas for help, cheerfully left for a trip. However, the next day, I received a message from my mother-in-law. You're causing a lot of trouble. I wondered what had happened, but I still didn't feel like replying. I too had almost faced a terrible situation because of my in-laws. But this was just the beginning. My in-laws were about to face their own karma, which would make their trip insignificant in comparison. My name is Emma Irving. I'm a 39-year-old pregnant woman. I'm newly married to my husband Scott, who is a year older than me. We are currently living with his parents. I've been married before. I got married at 20, dropped out of college, and had a child. However, less than 3 years into the marriage, my former husband died in an accident. Since then, I've raised my son, Tom, as a single mother. Despite facing harsh judgments as a young single mother, Tom is now 18 years old. He started living alone this spring for college. And that's when I married Scott and began living with him and his parents. I started dating Scott about a year ago. At first, I couldn't accept his feelings and refused his advances. But Scott always understood my circumstances and supported me. Gradually, I was drawn to him. Finally, Tom told me to consider my own happiness, and I decided to date Scott. Scott had a good relationship with Tom, and I felt happy to have started a relationship with him. However, my in-laws didn't accept me. Last year, when we went to announce our engagement, they reacted incredulously. Scott always spoke calmly. I'm planning to marry her. Her son, Tom, will be a college student next fall, and then... What? Her son. What a disgraceful woman you've brought. Despite knowing about my past marriage, they ranted in front of me. I could only respond with a wry smile. I wondered if I was not allowed to dream of happiness again because of my past. But Scott defended me fiercely. I've already told you about her circumstances. It's extremely rude to speak like that now. She has raised her son alone. A disgrace? Who are you talking to like that? My in-laws were briefly speechless at Scott's words, but they quickly retorted. But, it's suspicious that she wants to marry now. It seems like she's after our inheritance. She got pregnant and dropped out of some unknown college. She must be after Scott because she's out of money. Exactly. You're being deceived. Indeed, Scott's family is wealthy. His grandfather, my father-in-law's father, was a doctor, and they have money. Both my in-laws and Scott are from elite backgrounds. However, I only learned about this after our marriage was decided. And I knew nothing about him except his name before he proposed. Deceived? I've been fond of her for a long time. How could she possibly deceive me? Scott tried desperately to make his parents understand. But they refused to listen. Even after our marriage was decided, they still saw me as a gold digger. And a poor, uneducated single mother, and spread these thoughts among relatives. Of course, my divorce history contributed to their perception. They just didn't like any woman getting close to their son. They've always been cold to Scott's girlfriends. And it seems that's why Scott had no marriage history. My previous girlfriends were not accepted by my parents. Scott is a wonderful person, but I wondered why he was single until 40. When I asked, he said that. I didn't understand the meaning of his words then, but I do now. Just the thought of having such in-laws would make anyone reluctant to marry. just like others before me. I was aware that I had been subjected to sarcasm and was disliked even before we started dating. I knew they had disliked me even before our relationship, and hated me more because of my marriage history. Still, I was drawn to Scott's character, believing his parents would eventually understand. After marrying, we moved in together to take care of his elderly parents, hoping to clear up any misconceptions about my intentions. After we started living together, I soon became pregnant. The due date is in January. My husband and I were thrilled, expecting a busy end of the year. My parents, who live far away, Tom, and even the parents of my late husband, were very happy about the new addition to the family and concerned for my health. I had despaired when my former husband died, and I've faced countless difficulties. But now, I have begun to grasp happiness again. Therefore, I had no doubt that my in-laws would be happy about the news of their first grandchild and shared the news of my pregnancy with them. However, even though it was their first grandchild, my in-laws' expressions remained stern when we told them. A child, huh? It's going to cost a lot of money. Dad, you don't have to worry about that. It's our child, so we will take care of it. But, you know, Emma already has a stepchild. Saying this, my mother-in-law glanced at me with a hint of mockery. It stung a bit, but I raised my voice. Tom's tuition and living expenses are covered by the money left by my former husband and the support from his parents. You don't need to worry. I don't intend to use Scott's money for that. I said this clearly. Scott had wanted to become Tom's father, but it was Tom who declined the offer. I'd like Scott to be more like a big brother to me. That's what Tom told Scott when we got married. Scott seemed to feel pushed away at first, but he was very happy with Tom's words. So, don't spend money on raising me. But I do want you to scold me if I'm wrong and maybe treat me to a meal sometimes. Scott responded, we are definitely a family, and if that's what Tom wants, I guess it's fine. I secretly shed tears at their interaction. Therefore, we won't be using Scott's money for Tom's education. It was a decision made by the three of us. But, you know, we usually go on trips with Dad during Christmas holidays. If you want to go on a trip, just go. We don't intend to bother you too. The decision about Tom is ours, so Mom, you don't need to worry unnecessarily. Besides, even if we did spend money on Tom, it's none of your business. My in-laws kept making excuses and were not openly happy. Scott, frustrated with the two, said this as if giving up. As expected, my mother-in-law flared up in anger. And none of my business? You are my child. What's wrong with being worried? I'd appreciate simple concern, but the way you say it sounds sarcastic. I thought you'd be happy, but I guess I was wrong to expect that. I was sad that the news of the pregnancy turned into an argument. Scott, sensing my mood, patted my shoulder as I looked down. Then, my mother-in-law spoke out in anger. My family is just Dad and Scott. I didn't want a child from a woman I don't even recognize. If it's Emma's child, I can't expect much intelligence anyway. I thought it was too cruel. No matter how much I tried to reach out, my mother-in-law never tried to understand me. Mom's right. Scott, wake up. It's not too late to get a divorce. My father-in-law seemed to share the same opinion as my mother-in-law. I bit my lip, looking down. Enough already. I was devastated, but Scott always stood by my side. That alone was a salvation. From that day on, Scott stopped talking to his parents. Or rather, he became angry and started ignoring them. Ever since you married Emma, Scott has changed. When Scott wasn't around, my in-laws started saying sarcastic things to me. Perhaps blaming me for the change. I'm sorry. If you're sorry, then just leave. My in-laws became more arrogant as I tried not to provoke them further. Their sarcasm intensified as my belly grew. What an ugly body. I'm worried about what kind of child will be born. It's a late pregnancy, anyway. If only you were a bit prettier, even if the child turns out unintelligent. I often heard their mocking laughter. I had hoped they would understand someday. But my mental state gradually destabilized during the pregnancy. Still, I couldn't discuss this with Scott. I knew it would only increase the harassment from my in-laws and didn't want to worry Scott more. You got pregnant on your own and now you're slacking off on housework. You definitely won't be able to handle childcare. She would come to me when I was lying down due to poor health and spit out sarcasm. So I had no choice but to push myself, which eventually led to a threatened preterm labor. Even though you've given birth before, it's practically like a first pregnancy now. You can't overdo it. The doctor said this in a dismayed tone. When I was advised to rest at home, I desperately asked to be hospitalized. The doctor looked puzzled, but when I explained that I couldn't rest because of my in-laws, his eyes widened. It's amazing that you've endured such a harsh environment until now. The doctor agreed to hospitalize me. It was a temporary solution, but I was relieved to be away from my in-laws. As I approached full term, I was temporarily discharged. The preterm labor was resolved, and the baby could be born anytime. I was anxious about returning home. But a little distance from my in-laws made me feel like I could manage again. When Scott drove me to home, my mother-in-law looked displeased to see me. "Oh, you're back?" "Yes. Sorry for the inconvenience during my absence." "Inconvenience? It's more of a nuisance having you here." "Mom." Scott scolded my mother-in-law, but she just snorted and walked away. She seemed to have no awareness that her behavior had led to my hospitalization. Father-in-law was probably the same. Scott didn't think his parents were the reason for my preterm labor. But he was fed up with their attitude and suggested we stop living together. For now, I'll be hospitalized again after giving birth, so I'll be away from them. The first priority is the birth. Then, Scott and I agreed to decide what to do afterward. One day, my mother-in-law approached me. "If you're just lazing around, could you clean the outdoor sauna while I'm away?" My in-laws were leaving today for a 5-night, 7-day trip. They were going to Sardinia in Italy, a place they bragged about as much as they could. As my father-in-law's friend lives there. Even though you're a daughter-in-law, you don't clean for Christmas or prepare for the holidays. You said you wouldn't be a bother, but you're not helpful at all. Can't you at least do that much? While preparing for their trip, my mother-in-law spoke arrogantly. There's a family sauna outside, installed as a hobby by my father-in-law, but now no one uses it. She wanted me to clean it. Indeed, I hadn't done anything during the busy year-end. Annoyed by her constant nagging, I reluctantly agreed to clean the small sauna. I put on sandals and went outside to the sauna. Upon entering, the musty air made me cough. It's supposed to be cleaned yearly, but it was surprisingly dusty. Just as I was about to leave, the sauna door suddenly shut. Assuming it was the wind, I tried to open it without much concern. However, the door wouldn't budge. What? It won't open. The door should open with a push, but something outside seemed to be blocking it. Even putting my weight on it, it wouldn't move. To make matters worse, the sauna started making ominous noises and began to operate. Realizing it would get hot, I panicked and started banging on the door. "Anyone? Mother? Are you there? What's all this noise about?" She peered through the small window. "I'm sorry, but something fell in front of the door and I can't open it. The sauna seems to have started too. Could you open it from the outside?" I pleaded desperately. Then, my mother-in-law said, "Oh. A broom has got stuck and is blocking the door." Please, remove it. It's because of your bad behavior that this is happening. It's your punishment for stealing our son. Reflect on your actions for a while." She laughed heartily at her own words. I felt a chill run down my spine at her words. "Wait, please. The sauna has also started. At least unplug the sauna." "Oh. Is that how you ask for favors? Besides, the power switch is inside, right? I have to leave now. I don't have time to deal with you anymore." She said this and walked away from the sauna. I shouted desperately, but seeing her cheerful retreating figure, I gave up hope. I searched for the power switch. I found it under a seat, but my relief was short-lived. The power button seemed broken, as the sauna's temperature wouldn't decrease even after pressing off. No. It's broken. The sauna hadn't been used for a long time. It probably hadn't been maintained either. Despite several attempts, the sauna's power didn't turn off. And I resigned myself to finding another way out. Somebody. Help. I tried pushing the door and shouting, and then I felt a presence. Peering through the small window, I saw my father-in-law. He seemed to have just left the house with his luggage for the trip. "Father. Please help me. Open the door." I shouted at his figure. Noticing my voice, he looked over. He seemed startled to see me shouting from inside the sauna. But unfortunately, my mother-in-law emerged from the house at that moment. "Scott will be back tonight, so let her reflect for a while." "Oh, is that what this is about?" I overheard their conversation from a distance. "If it gets cold, turn on the power, and if it gets hot, turn it off. It'll be fine. Let's go." I shouted desperately again. "The power switch is broken, and I can't turn off the sauna. Please let me out." My father-in-law sighed after a quick glance at me. "Oh dear, lying now, are we?" "It's not a lie. Don't say another word. If you can't do anything, just stay quiet and reflect." I was stunned by his words. It seemed neither of them had any intention of letting me out. Indeed, Scott would be back by night, but in such a hot room, I might collapse before then. Moreover, I was pregnant. I must avoid collapsing at all costs. After they left, I pushed the door again. As I moved, something fell from my pocket. The noise drew my attention, and to my surprise, it was my phone. Panicked and having forgotten I had my phone, tears of relief came to my eyes. I hurriedly called Scott, but there was no connection. The message, "Please redial," that played, and as it ended, I felt desperate. "Please, someone help me." Just then, a message notification chimed. It was from Tom. I quickly called him. "Hey, Mom? Did you see my message? I'm coming to the house for Christmas." "Tom. Help me." I cut off Tom's words and screamed. "What's wrong? I'm locked in the house's sauna. Help me." Tom said he would come right away. Feeling relieved, I lost my strength and sat down. Tom, knowing that my in-laws would be away starting today, was actually on his way to visit me. A few minutes later, I was rescued from the sauna. "What happened? Why were you in there?" I explained the situation to Tom. He turned pale as he listened. "No way, were you locked in there on purpose?" "As much as it is, I can't believe that. It must have been an accident with a broom becoming a makeshift lock. So, it was just a coincidence that the sauna was powered on using an extension cord?" Tom said this, pointing to the cord leading out of the sauna. It was connected to an extension cord, which was plugged into a socket. I was horrified. The sauna had not been used for a long time. It seemed unlikely that it had been connected all this time. It felt more natural to think someone had deliberately locked me in and turned it on. If I hadn't arrived, it could have been really bad. Tom said this and hung his head in relief. About an hour had passed since I was locked in until I was rescued. The sauna was old and took time to heat up, which fortunately meant I got out before anything serious happened. I'm going to chase them down and give them a piece of my mind. Tom said this, but I stopped him. No, please. I don't even want to see their faces for a while. But I'm going to tell Scott everything about the harassment. I've been silent, but I can't take it anymore. That will be the best revenge on them. Tom reluctantly agreed to my words. Since the sauna was connected to the house's power, we could enter the house. As Tom and I went inside, Scott called back. Tom took the call on my behalf and told Scott everything about what his parents had done. Scott is coming back right away, Tom said, hanging up the phone. I felt guilty that Scott was leaving work during such a busy period. But his words brought me great relief. Emma. Are you okay? After a while, Scott rushed home at great speed. Apparently, he had taken a taxi and hurried back. I'm fine. Do you need to go to the hospital? I'm so sorry I couldn't answer the phone. Tom, thank you. Scott looked very upset. I felt even sorrier seeing him like that. I just happened to be here. I shudder to think what would have happened if I were delayed. I can't believe my parents would do such a thing. I really am. Both of you, don't be so down. I'm okay. I forced a smile and tried to cheer them up. But I can't forgive them for this. It's one thing to do this to me, but they endangered our child's life. I agree. I've been too lenient because they're my parents. But I can't forgive what they did. They need to learn a hard lesson. Scott said this and suddenly took out his phone. He started making a call, then left the room. Tom and I watched him curiously. Is it a work call? He did leave work suddenly. But I'm worried about staying here tonight, is that okay? Of course. Tom and I smiled and talked. Thinking I should treat Tom to something delicious, I opened the fridge and freezer, which were packed with meat and magnificent crabs, possibly for Christmas preparations. Tom's eyes sparkled at the luxurious ingredients. Let's eat them before they come back. But just then, Scott returned from his call. He cut into our conversation with a bright voice. Yeah, let's eat everything. All right. Despite no blood relation, their smiles were identical, and I couldn't help but smile too. Okay, let's have a steak. We were put in danger, but my in-laws were overseas. Eating steak shouldn't bring any bad karma. Resigned to this, I began preparing dinner, and we enjoyed a delicious meal together. The next morning, while preparing breakfast, I noticed several missed calls on my phone. They were from my mother-in-law. Ignoring them, thinking she had locked me up, I received a text message. Did you tell Scott anything? I ignored that message too. Then, another message came through. Because of you, something terrible has happened. I wondered what it could be but still didn't feel like replying. I had nearly been in a terrible situation myself. As I set my phone down, Scott's voice reached me. Wondering what it was about, I went to where Scott was. He seemed to be on the phone with my father-in-law, who was audibly irritated. I could hear his yelling even from where I stood. Just call the credit card company right now. Even if you call them now, that card won't work anymore. Then what should we do? Are you going to abandon us? I don't know. Do whatever you want. My father-in-law was furious. Scott, however, casually laughed it off and hung up the phone. The phone kept ringing afterward. Tom, who had appeared next to me without my noticing, asked Scott. What happened? I canceled the card yesterday. The one those two had was my family card. I was surprised. My in-laws were overseas. They were so angry because their card was not working. Well, I'm not going to let them off this easily, but for starters, they don't deserve to enjoy themselves. Let them struggle abroad. Tom laughed at this and said, "It's great that Scott is Mom's husband," giving him the highest compliment. After that, I kept receiving messages. Messages like, "It's your fault, Jinx, give back my kind son," like curses. I didn't reply, but I was frankly fed up. The curse-like emails from my mother-in-law continued every day during their trip. "I'm really sorry. How could I not have realized my mom was this crazy?" Scott was more mentally drained by the curse emails than I was. "Seeing both of us like this," Tom said, "I have an idea." Scott and I tilted our heads, but listened to him. Then, Tom asked to borrow my phone. Scott and Tom stepped outside for a few minutes, returning with a big laugh. They then contacted my mother-in-law from my phone. Due to Aunt's emails, Scott has gone crazy. I can't stop him anymore. Tom. They attached a video to the message. When played, the video started with Scott in the sauna. His face was visible through the small window. And the entrance was blocked with a broom, just like when I was locked in. It's hot. The power switch is broken. But this is a punishment. I'm taking the punishment for my parents bullying Emma. Scott's shouting voice came from the phone. Apparently, they went outside earlier to shoot this video. The 1-minute video featured Scott's dramatic acting, which left me astonished. Right after sending it, a call came to my phone. "Hello. You're Emma's son, right? What did you do to Scott?" "I don't know. Scott did this all by himself." Scott listened to the conversation, trying to suppress his laughter. "Let him out immediately. He won't come out. He says it's his fault." "Then at least unplug the power," she pleaded desperately, but Tom remained calm. "The power switch is inside, right? I heard you say that to my mom. It's been unused for so long, it must be broken by now. Scott is suffering. Why does he have to be punished? He doesn't need to." I was shocked to hear my mother-in-law admit she knew the power switch was broken. She knew, yet she didn't help me when I was locked in, which made me furious. "Mother. Emma? You're there too. Hurry and save Scott." "I don't know. Let Scott reflect until he's satisfied. He's suffered enough because of his parents." After saying that, I hung up the phone. Tom and Scott burst into laughter once the call ended. Their trip still had a few days left. Without a working card and worried about their son, they wouldn't enjoy their trip. Imagining them in such a state, I felt relieved. Then, on their return day, as expected, they burst into the house with incredible urgency. "Scott. Is Scott all right? Oh, welcome back." I greeted them nonchalantly. My in-laws glared at me with fierce expressions. "Where's Scott?" "Scott? Oh, he's still reflecting. He says it's all his fault." The moment they heard those words, my in-laws turned pale. Then, my father-in-law muttered apprehensively. "Doesn't it smell bad? That can't be." They hurried outside, pale as ghosts. I couldn't help but burst into laughter. Ugh. What is this? This is terrible. Presumably, they opened the sauna. Their shouts, along with a terrible stench, reached me. The smell was awful. I pinched my nose and went outside. "You. What is this?" While holding her nose, my mother-in-law pointed at the sauna. There lay the remnants of the crab and fine meat we had enjoyed eating. The ingredients she had prepared for Christmas. We enjoyed it very much. What a misleading thing to do. Where is Scott? Misleading? Did you think Scott had rotted away? It seems you were able to imagine what would happen if someone were locked in the sauna. My words silenced them both. Perhaps they were lost for words at my chilling statement. I nearly rotted away in there too. I never imagined you knew the power was broken and still locked me in. That. I'm sorry about that. She uttered words of apology for the first time. Probably just a pretense until she confirmed Scott was safe. Then Scott appeared at the door. Scott. You're safe? They looked as if I had taken him hostage. Relieved, they approached Scott, but he spoke to them without changing his expression. Safe? How can I say that? What? I heard their breath catch. How can I be safe when my beloved wife was treated so cruelly? That is? Neither Emma nor I were safe. You might as well think we're already rotten. Clearly, Scott was declaring his estrangement from his parents. They collapsed to their knees. No matter how much I tried to reach out, we were not only unaccepted but also rejected. Finally, the end had come. Emma, let's go. Scott, who had apparently prepared in advance, left the house carrying a large suitcase. I'm sorry. I'll be kinder to Emma from now on. Scott, Emma, I'm truly sorry. As they apologized desperately, Scott reached out his hand to me, shaking off their grasp. I took his hand and we started walking. As we moved away from the house, my mother-in-law's wailing echoed through the neighborhood. We stayed in a hotel from that day, planning to look for a house. The next day, as we returned home to collect some necessities, there was a police car and a crowd in front of the house. What happened here? Scott asked a neighbor. Scott. Something smelled terrible since yesterday. So I called the police. What happened? I realized immediately. The large amount of organic waste in the sauna must have been left unattended with the door open. Peeking inside, I sighed deeply as I saw my in-laws pleading with the police. Get our son back from that woman. She kidnapped him. She's a real witch. Scott reluctantly went out and explained to the police officer. When the son who was supposedly kidnapped came to explain, the police could only give a wry smile. Scott, I was wrong. Please come back home. She clung to Scott, crying loudly. Ma'am. You were the one who treated your daughter-in-law badly, right? You reap what you sow. Instead of crying, you and your husband better clean up that garbage. You're causing a disturbance to your neighbors. I couldn't help but laugh as I heard the police's admonishing voice from outside. My in-laws had lost their beloved son due to their actions. They might not be financially troubled, but surely they would lead a lonely, loveless life from now on. And likely, they wouldn't have any special Christmas feast this year, but that was their own doing. Scott, Tom, and I moved into an apartment at the beginning of the year. We stayed in a hotel until then, which was very comfortable for me, especially being pregnant. As the new year arrived, my water broke and I was rushed to the hospital, where I gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Despite the tough pregnancy, I was overjoyed she was born safely. Scott and Tom came to the hospital right away, happy about our new family member. Once we settled down, we planned to buy our own home. Scott secretly intended to make a room for Tom so he could come home anytime. I'm proud of my life, blessed with a wonderful husband and two kind, lovely children.